The last concept that we want to talk about in section 1 of chapter 5 is rounding decimals. So when we round whole numbers, it says round to the nearest tenth, or round to the nearest tens, or round to the nearest hundreds. We look at that place because that's the place that's going to either stay the same or go up one. But the number that's right next to it, the number that's to the right of it, is the number that determines whether that tens or that hundreds is going to go up or stay the same. That same concept is going to be used for rounding decimals. So the concept is completely the same. So when we look at this, I have rounding to the nearest tenth and rounding to the nearest hundredth. So in rounding to the nearest tenth, the first thing we need to do is make sure we know where that tenth place is. So the tenth place is the number right next to the decimal, right to the right of it. Okay, so this is the number that's either going to go up one or it's going to stay the same. So remember, if the number is from 0 to 4, it stays the same. If the number is from 5 to 9, it goes up. So what number do we look at to determine whether we're staying the same or going up? Well, we look at the number next to it. So in this case, the number is 9. Because the number 9 is in your up, it's going to kick it up. This is going to become a 5. So we're going to have 0.5. And then every number past the place that you're rounding to should become a 0. So if we're rounding to the nearest tenth, only the tenths place should have a value in it. All the rest should just have zeros. So let's look at this one, 4.63 or 4 and 63 hundredths. So again, 6 is what we're rounding to because that's in the tenths place. 3 is the number to the right, so the 3 is going to determine whether the 6 stays the same or goes up one. And since 3 is a lower number, it's telling that 6 to stay the same. So we're going to have 4.6, and then everything past the number that we're rounding to is going to become a 0. So now we have 4.6 or 4.60 or 4 and 6 tenths, however you want to word that. So now let's practice with rounding to the nearest hundredth. So again, the first thing we need to do is figure out what number is in the hundredths place. The hundredths place is the second one over from 0. So in this one we have the 6, and in this one we have a 9. So in this one we have 0.716 or 0 and 761 thousandths. So we know we're going to be rounding to the nearest hundredth. What number do we look at to see if this is going to stay a 6 or go up to a 7? We look at the number to the right. So since this is a 1 and it's on the lower side, that means that this 6 is going to stay the same. So we would write this as 0.76, and then every number after the number that we're rounding to becomes a 0. Now this last one is a little tricky, but it's good to see what happens in some unique circumstances. Just like with whole numbers, this happens. With decimals, it happens as well. We know we're rounding to the 9, correct? And we know that the 6 is what's going to tell us whether to go up or stay the same. Since the 6 is in the go up range, we're going to come over and we're going to go up to 10. So this 9 is going to become a 10. So how do we write that? Well, we would write it as 7 point, that 9 becomes a 10. And what happens to everything after the place value that we're rounding to? It becomes a 0. So in this case, we could just write 7.1 or 7 and 1/10. So 96 thousandths would round to 1/10. So again, this is just a unique circumstance and it might be a little bit confusing, but with practice, I'm sure you can pick it up. And again, it's not a huge part of algebra, so you're only going to have 1, maybe 2 in the homework where you're rounding. But it's a concept that we do want to cover and just make you aware of it, even though it's not something that's super fundamental to algebra itself.